All right, welcome everybody. It is Wednesday. We want to say that out loud so we remember what day it is. It is Wednesday. Today is the middle of the week. Okay, they're coming on in. We have 145 so far. It's growing. Welcome to color class. Everybody take their seat. Okay. All righty, it's growing, it's getting bigger. Here we are at around 2:30. People are already using the chat box. Nicholas, Riley, welcome back. You have been very loyal this week. Thank you, and last week. So let's get into it. Welcome to Paul Mitchell School's virtual guest artist session. You can see today we have Miss Kristy Varga with us. And again, we just want to point out a few features that we have here. We have our chat box, so you guys are already using that to say hello to Miss Kristy. And then we also have our Q&A box. So again, let's be really clear about the Q&A. We would love any color-related questions to pop into this section here so we can get to them at the end. If there's an appropriate time in the middle of her presentation, we'll ask a few questions, but otherwise, let's plug them all in there. And then what we're able to do is to actually download that Q&A chat box. So if there's any that we don't get to in this exciting class today, we can follow up with you afterwards. So Kristy will get a copy of that. Something else I'd like to point out, which we had a few questions coming in through our email and direct message through Instagram, is where to get this content afterwards. So we do put all of this on Plugged In, the recording along with any home play that may come with these virtual sessions. So if you go on Plugged In under the Education tab, you're going to see a Distance Learning Tools yellow box. Click on that and then go to Live Upcoming Classes. From there, you're going to see our banner that's blue and scroll all the way to the bottom once you click that banner, and you're going to see all the home play and live recordings there. So again, right where you guys register for these classes, scroll down to the bottom and you're going to see your home play and recorded sessions there if you guys want to watch these again or share them with a friend. So, all right, Kristy, I'm going to pass it over to you.
All right. Hey, everyone. I'm so glad that you guys all tuned back in for color. So I got quite a few messages through Instagram throughout the week, and I really wanted to give you guys a class that you wanted and needed. So I took some advice from some of the future professionals, and I am tailoring this class towards your basic color as well as some hand painting. A lot of the feedback I got was we want to see basic color with some dimension. So I figured I want to show you hand painting, so might as well get that base and that hand painting in there together. So I'm going to start with just a little bit of our hand painting theory, go through some of the product choices, some of those tools, and then we're going to touch on placement and effect. Unfortunately, because we only have a certain amount of time today, I do want to kind of move a little bit quickly through the theory portion because I really want you guys to see the hands-on. So if you have any questions about the theory portion, please reach out to me and I will answer those questions as best I can. So let's jump in. All right, so when we talk about hand painting, we have so many different options. We talked last week about all the toning options we have. We have a ton of lightening options as well. So when we're hand painting, there really are 3 lighteners within our Paul Mitchell systems that can work well with a hand painting application. The first one is our Skylight. Skylight, we know, is designed for hand painting. And then we also have our Synchro Lift. Synchro Lift is so awesome. It's that blue base. It contains potato starch, so it's going to help with that resistive swelling. So that's why that is one product that we typically like to use because we know where we put that product, it's going to stay. And then the last one is our Lighten Up. Lighten Up, because it has that beeswax base, just like the color does. It is a little bit of that thicker consistency, and again, is going to stay where you put it. Let me touch back on Skylight one more time, just real fast. Let's go one more. There we go. When we are using Skylight, this is, like I said before, a ideal for your hand painting. It's designed for hand painting applications. So the reason that it's designed for that is it contains what's called kaolin clay in it. And the kaolin clay, as this lightener starts to process, the kaolin clay creates this shell on the outside of the product. Once that shell is created, now with whatever lightener is left in the inside, that's going to do the lightening. So it's not going to transfer as easily. So unfortunately, we are not using Skylight today, so I don't get to talk much more about Skylight, but in the coming weeks we will. We are actually going to be using some Synchrolift of our hand painting. So let's talk about our tools. We have a few different tools that we really like for hand painting and were designed for our hand painting. I am a big fan of our Paul Mitchell tint brushes, but because they're so stiff, it's hard to hand paint. So it's great for combing through the hair with color, but not going to be ideal for your hand painting applications. Now, can you do it? You can. You're just going to have to work a little bit harder. So these were the 3 products, tools that were basically created for hand painting just to help with your application and to get that beautiful blend. The first one is your lightener paddle. Some of you out there are very comfortable with a paddle. Some of you do not like a paddle, and that's okay. I would practice with your paddle and see how you like it. Personally, I'm not a paddle user, but there are situations where I will pick it up and use it every once in a while. The next one is our 1.75 feather tip brush. So this is the brush that you're going to see on the very far right. The unique thing about this brush is it has feather tips. Let me show you. So because of these feather tips, you're going to get a blend really easily. And I'll show you a few different ways, but even if you're going horizontally on a section, you're going to get a nice blend because of that feather tip. The next one is our 1-inch angled feather tip brush. This one is awesome for detailing. If I have an area of the head and I really want to get like a highlight carved in there, this would be the brush that I use. This isn't going to be my everyday, use it all the time brush, but it's also the brush that I don't want to live without. So those are the tools that we can use that go along with our hand painting. The next tools is basically going to be what we can utilize to put in between sections if we choose to do so. So on this next slide, we're going to see we have mesh on our far left. That's one thing that you can use to put in between sections. We have our clear film. Clear film is awesome because you can see everything that's happening right through that clear film. On the very bottom, we have our cotton. And the cotton you're just going to lay in between each section. So there's a little bit of lift in between each section so they're not sitting flat on top of each other. And then that last one is going to be your foil. Foil is what we're going to be using today. And I was kind of hoping we could do open air processing, but I really wanted to get the incubation. And that's the great thing about foil. Not only is it going to separate the sections and really help with the transfer, but it's also going to be that heat activator. So as that lightener starts to process, the foil is going to help it heat up and process even faster. So that's what we will be utilizing today. There are so many other things out there that people are using to put in between their sections, and that's totally fine as long as it's working for you. But definitely having the right tools when you're going into your hand painting applications is so ideal. Sometimes that can make and break our service. So just remember, if you're not comfortable with using any of those products, definitely start practicing with those so that it is just an easy application for you once you get to use them. All right, so let's jump into some placement and effect. And honestly, you guys, this is where you can have a great hand painting application or where your hand painting technique can go very wrong. I always tell people, you understand hair color once you understand placement and effect, because we can formulate, we can, mix up this color with this developer, mix up this lightener with this developer, put it on the hair. But if we don't understand how we're placing color in the hair and what we're gonna see, what that effect is gonna be from it, we really don't know what we're doing. So we actually have 2 of these charts that are gonna help explain our placement and effect. This first one is our cutting effect and key point chart. You'll notice on the very left, you're gonna see all of the hair cutting techniques. You've got your one length, graduation, and your layers. And then all the way to the right, you're going to see key points and examples of where you're gonna focus color within these hair cutting techniques. So for instance, if I'm dealing with my one length haircut, I only have to focus my color on the top of the head. And the reason I only have to focus my color there is because all that hair is falling to one point and you're not gonna see anything happening in the middle parts of the hair. Now, the question I always get is, well, can you foil in that area for one length? You sure can. You can foil wherever you want. But to save yourself time and to really get the same end result, you really only have to focus on that top portion. When you are dealing with a graduated haircut, the graduation is the one thing that we really want to pay attention to. We don't want to put any dimension, whether it be foils, hand painting, block color, any of that into hair that is 3 inches or shorter. And the reason we don't want to put that dimension into 3 inches or shorter is because you don't have any movement in the hair. And when you don't have movement, you have stripes, you have dots, you have, you can see basically everything you did, a shape, if you put a shape in there. So typically on a graduation, it's, you know, hugging the neck and giving you a buildup of that weight. So it's usually 3 inches or shorter. So you just want to be very aware of that and stay out of those areas. And then lastly would be our layers. Our layers, you really want to focus your color everywhere. With this haircut, you have movement. You know, when you move your head, those layers are bouncing all over the place. So you're seeing inside the hair, you're seeing on the nape, you're seeing on the sides. So you really want to make sure with this that you're putting that color everywhere. So that's going to be how we're looking at our cut and how we can focus color within that haircut. Now, the next portion of placement and effect is called our placement. Jump to the next slide. Our color placement and effect chart. So this is really just focusing on color itself. So you'll notice, like we had those haircuts, we have 3 different ways that we can put color into the hair. We can put it in horizontally, we can put it in diagonally, and we can put it in vertically. Each one of those, each one of those placements is going to give us a different end result. So you'll notice with our horizontal weave, this is a very, very strong, all that color falls to one point, symmetrical, and it's gonna act like that wall of color. So if you want something that is really gonna be bold, then you want to use a horizontal placement. Now, a lot of times I hear people, well, I don't know, we don't wanna use bold because we're doing hand painting. No, sometimes we want bold in hand painting. It's just what you're choosing to pair that bold placement with. So when I say that, you can pair a placement with slicing. You can pair a placement with weaving. You can pair a placement with edging applications, with sketching applications. So you're gonna get a different end result out of the application you use combined with the placement you're using. So moving into diagonal. Diagonal is the most commonly used in placements because it is the most forgiving. Because it is that diagonal line, it's going to fall very diffused. It's going to fall in a sheet of color, and all that color is falling to different points. So it's really going to blend nicely together. Again, like we were talking about with horizontal, you pair diagonal with a different application, an edging application, versus a sketching application, you are going to get a very different end result just based on the fact that those applications are giving you a different end result. But anytime you really want diffusion in the hair, your diagonal placement is going to be the placement you want to use. And lastly, we have our vertical placement. Vertical placement is the placement that does not get used enough. I absolutely love putting color in vertically. The one reason why it's not used a lot is because it's hard. Gravity is really working against you when you're trying to go in vertically and put color in the hair. But it is a beautiful end result if done correctly. Another reason it's not used as much is because it can give you those stripes in the hair. And that's one of the effects of vertical. It gives you strands and bands. It's going to be bold as well, and all that color is falling to one point. So it is a bold technique, like we said, can be paired with different applications, slicing, weaving, different hand painting applications. So yeah, if you want that strand and band, your vertical is going to be what you want to use. Now you'll notice in these applications that we're going to be doing today, you can absolutely combine these together. So let's say I want to use vertical placement, but I want it to be a little bit more diffused and spread a little bit more through the hair. I can take a vertical diagonal placement. Now I'm going to get a little bit of diffusion because I'm slightly diagonal, but it is going to still fall pretty bold because I have a very vertical section there. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into the hair. And if you have questions about placement and effect, please put it into the questions and answers box. I would love to go through placement and effect more in depth with you guys. All right, so let's move into our next slide. When we are talking about hand painting, saturation is something that we really have to be aware of. And it's very different than our saturation than if we're going in with a basic color. Like if you do a basic color and we say saturate, 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 saturate. You don't want holidays, you wanna make sure you've got that color or that lightener everywhere. When we are utilizing hand painting, we have the option. We can do what we call a push through, which is going to be saturating through that entire section, or we can do what's called a surface painting, where we're really just staying on the top portion of that hair and not pushing that product all the way through. So in the end, it's going to give us a little bit more dimension. So those are just two things to be aware of as we start moving through here. You might hear me say push through or surface. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. We have, you heard me saying before, what we call applications. So this is basically the action that you are using to paint on the hair. That's all it is. Am I painting with a high peak here and a low peak there? It's how I'm painting on the hair. And we've given each of those applications a name. Now, the one that we're only going to focus on today is going to be our edging application. So you're going to see with our edging application, if we jump over to the next slide, you're going to see with our edging application, this is where we have our peaks and we have our valleys. So it's going to give us that dimensional highlighted end result. And this is one I really do like to use because it is going to be more diffused. But again, if you want it to be bold, what can we place that with? Horizontal placement, right? So yeah, this is a very beautiful application. So we will be utilizing that today, and I'll talk a little bit more about application as we start in our hands-on. So once we have, oh, here we go. We've got our different points. Basically, when you are going through and you are doing a hand painting application, you've got the choice to do a 1 point, 2 point, and 3 point when it comes to your edging and contouring. So that's just a good visual to see when you have that 1 point, what is my result going to look like? When you have that 2 point, I've got my peaks and I've got my valley. So just a good visual. All right, so once we have all these applications that we only talked about one, but we have a lot of applications. Now, once you take that application and you combine it with placement, this is going to give you a technique. So the combination of your applications that you used with how you're going to place it in the hair is going to be the technique. So a lot of times you hear people say hand painting techniques. Well, a technique really is what I'm diagramming. If I look at a diagram, that's the hand painting technique. How I'm painting on the hair is just that application. So just a little bit of a difference between those two. And then lastly, you're going to notice we've got our effect. So you're going to hear these three in hand painting: application, technique, and effect. And effect, all effect is what are we seeing at the end of our service? with that placement that we chose, with that application that we chose, now combining those together, this is gonna give us what that end result looks like. So hopefully I didn't run through that too quickly and didn't get to cover as much as I wanted to. But I really do want to go into hands-on, and you guys will learn quite a bit from the hands-on portion. So let me get set up here. Stephanie, do you think you can pop up the diagram? All right, so this diagram looks totally crazy, and it is kind of crazy, but I really wanted to be able to show everything that I'm doing in the hair. So you'll notice here, we've got our edging applications. It shows an example of that at the bottom. And we've got combinations of using our diagonal sections and then moving into some horizontal. So what that's gonna give me is it's gonna give me some diffusion mixed with some bolder end results. So this is actually the end result of this technique that we did. And she turned out so awesome. I will go through and show you kind of the different ways of where we lifted or brought this blonde up a little bit higher and then added that dimension in there. She started out as a level 7. So I did deepen her quite a bit and give her some of those bright pieces. So anyway, this is what we're gonna be doing today. So let's jump in. So the sectioning, again, looks a little challenging at times, but it all has a reason. There's a reason why I've parted everything off there. And the one thing I really like to stress about any hand painting, any color application really, the cleaner my sections are, the cleaner my end result is gonna be. So, some people think, oh, I don't have to section anymore because I'm a professional. Not necessarily. Clean sections are gonna give you clean end result. So each of these sections is kind of doing something different. And if you look at the diagram, you'll see we've got our baby lights up around the front. That's gonna give us that, that lightener that is really coming as close to the regrowth as possible. So we know people love these little money pieces here. They wanna keep those as light as possible. So we're gonna stick with our baby lights up around the front. As we move into the back, this nape area is where we're gonna be doing some of our diagonal applications so that we get some diffusion through there. As we start to move up on the head, you're gonna see it switching to horizontal. And then the same on the sides, we're gonna be going diagonal and then switching to horizontal. And then this top is actually going to be a veil. So this whole area up here is gonna be the base color. So when you're sectioning this technique out, you really wanna think about that. Think about the haircut you're doing this on, as well as what kind of dimension you wanna see. If you want to be able to see a lot of the blonde, you might wanna make this area a little bit smaller. If you really want to see less of the blonde, more of the base, you can make that guy a little bigger. You also wanna think about the layers. If the layers are too short, then it's only gonna cover that veil is only gonna cover a certain amount of your blonde, and then you're gonna see a bunch of blonde at the end. So that's where your haircut is gonna kind of come into play. Just thinking about how long those layers are on the top and how far they're gonna veil over. All right, so I'm actually gonna start my application with my baby lights. And this is probably a question I get asked all the time is, where do you start your hand painting applications? And really it differs all the time because there are certain times that I want my lightness in the front, and there are certain times I know that maybe I'm gonna have to wash this part out in the back before I'm even done with the front, so I'm gonna attack that area first. Or maybe I want that lightness in the back. Today, I want the majority of my lightness to be in the front, so that's why I'm gonna start those baby lights in the front. Now, another thing to think about when you're going through with your lightener and your developer and where you want your lightness is gonna be your developer choice. one thing I think that we don't take into account enough is that we can change our developer, right? So if I start in the front here and I'm a little afraid that that's going to be sitting on here through the entire application, I can knock this developer down to a 5 volume or a 10 volume. So definitely play with your developers to get the lift that you're looking for. So I could start with my 10 volume. I could then bump it up to 20 volume. I could even then do a 30 when I get into the back so that it processes a lot faster. So that's probably my biggest advice when it comes to planning out where you're going to start your applications. All right, so I'm gonna start, you'll notice in this sectioning that I have this whole hairline clipped out in front. And that is basically where we're doing the baby lights. A lot of times people think your baby lights are just, you know, a few foils on the very top and maybe a few foils on the side. Really, when you're baby lighting, you wanna get that whole hairline. Because now if you get the whole hairline, anytime the person moves their hair one way or another, they're gonna be able to see that blonde up around the hairline. So really my sectioning is dictated by their hairline. So I might, you know, be able to do one foil here. I might need to break it up just based on how their hairline is moving. So that's probably the biggest thing to look at when you're moving into baby lights is just follow the hairline. So you'll notice before I even got into my baby lights, my sections and how I have these clips actually just going up and not Zulu knotting. The reason for that is when I am doing hand painting, I want the hair to be easy to apply to. If I'm dealing with a lot of a wave, that when I have that tension and I'm painting on the hair, the second I let go, what's it gonna do? It's gonna bounce right up and it's gonna move all the product that I just applied. So that's just one thing I like to do is make sure that it's a little bit smoothed out. Now, if you are doing it on a guest who has naturally curly hair and she wears her hair curly, then don't straighten it out. Look at that haircut and what she wants her end result to look like, and you're gonna design it based off of her curl pattern. All right, so we're gonna jump in with these baby lights first. With our baby lights, we're gonna start with 1/8 of an inch section, and we're just going to go right at that hairline. So the very first one there is gonna be my 1/8 of an inch. Now, if we go more than 1/8 of an inch, what can happen? I'm asking you like you guys are gonna answer. If I go more than my 1/8 of an inch, you're gonna notice that the hair that's a little further back in that section isn't gonna get as close to the regrowth. So it's really gonna help keep with getting that product close to the scalp as well as saturation. You typically have holidays when you are not being aware of that section size. All right, so going in with my baby light, I dropped my foil in there. Now we have to remember this is a guest face. So our pressure that we're applying, we don't want to get too crazy. So typically if I'm working on a guest face, one, I'll tell them, hey, I'm gonna be in your face for a minute. And usually they're like, okay. And then I like to just kind of stick my product a little higher than I normally would on a foil, just so I'm not on their cheek. But again, this is something that's really important with any foiling. You do not want to take the majority of your product. So right after you've dipped, you do not want to deliver that right to your 1/8 of an inch fold line on that foil because that's too much product. And what that product does is it swells and it moves. So we don't want that product to move up and out of our foil. So I'm going to use my hand as a platform here, getting all of that nicely saturated. Now, this part is going to depend on what you want this end result to look like. If you have a guest and she wants this money piece up here to be all the way up to the regrowth, take it all the way up to that 1/8 of an inch line. If you don't, if you want it to be kind of a nice feather, then you can go ahead, tilt your brush vertically and just feather that up. The only thing to be aware of is not to go past the 1/8 of an inch line still, but you can get that feather so that it's not that harsh line. All right, so then I'm gonna go ahead, I kind of eyeball where my half point, my half point is on my foil, and I give it a little tug. And when I do that, it's gonna help easily fold up. I see a lot of times people grabbing the end of the foil and trying to just meet it to the top. And whenever that's done, you kind of get a mess all over. So if you give it that tug, fold it up, give it your 2 little creases there, measure my comb, bring that up, and fold that in. Now, because this is her face area, typically I'll just give it a little bend so she can see. Okay, so I would do 2 of these, 2 to 3, depending upon how wide you want that money piece to be. I think when we all started, baby lighting in the very beginning, we were like, the bigger the better, do that as much as you can. And then it was just ending up like a chunk right in the front. So, just be aware of how much of a chunk you're creating. All right, so again, applying my foil. Whoop. Let me fix that guy. So you'll notice when I am applying my foils, I'm not going in with the rat tail of my comb to place my foil in. And I know a lot of people will say that they can get closer when they do that, and maybe they can. But at the end of the day, the way I look at it is my comb is a flat surface. My head is not a flat surface. Now, when I put a foil in, I can make it mold to the guest's head. So I'm gonna get it closer. So that's just one thing that I like to point out when it comes to using the end of your comb. Erica, do we have any questions that are pertaining to this portion? I think we lost her. So you're gonna notice on the side here, we kind of have that dip. So I'm gonna take these in 2 different sections. I'm gonna take, one here where it starts to go out, and then I'm gonna treat this one completely separate. Otherwise, I'm not gonna be able to get as close with all the movement in the hairline there. So I'm gonna show you just a few more of these baby lights, and then I do wanna be able to move in to some other areas so that you can see, can you guys see that? So that you can see the application. Okay, so baby lights, difference between baby lights and weave. A weave, you're really getting those defined pickups. We know with our Paul Mitchell systems, our standard is a pick up 1, drop 2. With a baby light, you're just trying to pick up and drop out as little as possible because you want it to be diffused, but you don't want to see like line. So you're going to notice with your baby light, you pick up more than you're dropping. One other fun fact about weaving, notice you'll see some people weave up at the top here, like up at the root area, you're seeing them weave. When you weave up at the top, you're gonna get a cleaner end result. The other option you have is weaving down at the bottom. Now, when I weave down at the bottom, I'm gonna get a more natural end result. And the reason is, if I'm up at the top, I've got all the tension on every single hair that's in that section, and I'm able to pick up what I want. As I move down here, I'm dealing with different lengths. Even if I have a 1 length haircut, there are different lengths in the hair based on how the hair is growing, breakage. So if I'm picking up down at the bottom, it's automatically dropping out hair that lives up here. So you tend to get a more diffused end result. So sorry, I know that wasn't really about what we're doing, but I thought it would help. All right, so again, we're gonna place in our foil following that hairline. Now, sometimes the hairlines are tricky. I don't know if you guys can see this, but it doesn't want to go up against that hairline. And that's when I kind of just pull up that foil and I place it where I want the foil to go. Don't think that once you put the foil in, you can't move it. Once you put the foil in, you can move it wherever you want. I'm super awkward right now because my tray is over here. So I'm gonna do a little gymnastics. All right, so applying that product to the mid area. And now with what I have, I'm gonna use that product to work through my mids and my ends. Really, the way I look at it when I'm doing any kind of foiling I want to pick up the amount of product that I'm gonna need for that entire foil in my one pickup. I shouldn't have to go back in there and reload my brush. Okay, so taking my 2 fingers and bracing it there, I'm gonna give a little feather. All right. And eyeballing my half point, folding it on up, pinch, 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 measure with my comb, and then I'm gonna fold it in. And then remember with our guest, if we wanna let them see a little bit, we can crease it up so they can see. So you're gonna do that around the whole hairline. Any questions about baby lights that I can answer before I move on? Okay, we're moving on.
Kristy, sorry, we have 3 questions. Let's
Okay.
see. How far are you actually feathering from the roots? That's one question.
It really depends on what you want your end result to look like. If you want it to look more lived in and less like it's growing right out of the head, definitely feather it down a little bit further. If you want it to be, if you want that money piece to come right from the scalp, you're gonna go to that 1/8 of an inch line, doing your feather.
Great. And here's another one based on what you're doing right now. What size section in placement would you best recommend for those guests that come in wanting bigger, bolder looks towards the front of the face? Kind of that, I think of Kelly Clarkson for some reason, but yeah.
So there's a few different ways that you can actually go about that. This is one way of doing it. Do your baby lights back to back. That's one thing I don't think I pointed out as in depth, is I'm not leaving any hair in between these except what I've dropped out of my weave. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna give me that bolder end result. The tendency is you want it thicker, so I'm gonna take a big thick section, but you can't get up as high and you could end up with some holidays. So I would say this is your best way of going about that. Now there are some hand painting applications you can use that will help with it. We're not going over any today, but contouring is a great way to kind of give that money piece up in the front. And a contour is basically you've got your point here and then it starts to diffuse down to where you see a lot of lightness and then down to a little bit of lightness. So that's an application that's also used really well for that.
Okay. The last question we have is, so could you alternate the placement, which I agree, yes, a placement depending on, it was really great. Skylar's class yesterday was all focused on section angle accuracy and how it supports the haircut, which is really great that now you're talking about placement and effect, especially, you know, now working with color. So could you alternate the placement of your hand painting techniques? Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are times when I'm working on a guest and I've planned that I'm going to do something, and then I get to a certain area of the head and I think, oh, no, maybe I should go diagonal here instead of horizontal. So you can change it. It's your masterpiece. And that's what I love about color. This is your creation. So yeah, you can change anything you want. I'm using diagonal and horizontal today. Doesn't mean you always have to use diagonal and horizontal. If you want the entire head to look diffused, you can go in there with diagonal placements all over the head. So yeah, absolutely make that work for you.
Thank you. That's all for now.
Okay. All right, so we're gonna move into our hand painting. And we talked before about how we're gonna be adding a base into our hand painting. So I'm gonna show you a little bit of both. Now, when we hand paint, we can tend to increase our section size, especially if we're doing what we call a surface paint. We can take a pretty thick section. I don't know if you can see how thick that is. If I'm doing surface, I'm only touching this top portion of that section anyway. I'm not trying to necessarily push it all the way through. Maybe I'm surface painting here, and then where my ends get a little bit more skinny, I'm gonna push through there. So that's one option, absolutely. You can do that push through and some of the surface painting, sorry. Now, because we're doing a base, we want to remember that our base needs to be applied to where we're not getting any holidays for that. So because we're doing a base at the same time, we kind of have to take our section sizes down a little bit. And as you know, as fun as it is to be able to move through the head with big sections, it's not fun when you have gray hair that wasn't touched up. So just something to think about there. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and actually just apply with my base color to just that 1/8 of an inch right there of the hairline. And we're gonna make sure that we're doing both the top and the bottom. All right, now that's not all I'm doing with my base, so hold on. All right, so once you have this section here, now you're gonna think, okay, how am I going to place the lightener in here to get the end result I'm looking for? If I want this to be a nice highlight coming up through the face, but not too bold, I'm gonna make sure to stick just to the outer edge of this section. If I want it to be a little bolder, I can make that area a little bit thicker. So first thing I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna start with my base. All right, I want to add my base in, which means where I want that negative space to be. I hope that this is good enough to see. So if I have my lightener peaks here, I'm going to want to bring my color down. And again, how wide or how skinny that color that you bring down is just going to depend on what you want the end result to be. So I basically got my regrowth, and then I took my brush, tilted it vertically again. So if I go in there horizontally, I'm gonna cover way too much of that section. So tilting it vertically and bringing that down just as far as I wanna go. I stopped mine up about here. All right, so once I have that, now we have options, right? We talked about you can do open air processing, you could do foils, you could do cotton. We are gonna use cotton today. Once I have that base in there, I now have something that hair can stick to. So if you feel, this is totally up to you, if you feel like you didn't maybe get all the way through that section, you can lay that down onto your foil and have that surface so that you can push that through. Totally an option. You don't have to do that either. You can just paint it in your hand and then drop it down onto your foil. All right, so then I'm gonna add my lightness in. So I have a little bit of product on my brush, and I'm gonna go ahead and paint on the hair, bringing it up just as high as I wanna go. And you'll notice again, my brush is tilted vertically. And then bringing that down. So if you were to think about surface or push through, I am absolutely doing a push through right now. Because my section size is so much smaller and I'm going all the way through to the bottom of the foil, it is gonna be that push through. Now I chose to have my lightener up a little bit higher here. I don't have to go the same height on both edges. I can keep my height a little bit lower on this end.
Kristy, can you share a little bit about the brush that you're using right now again with us?
Yes, I'm using the 1.75 feather tip brush that Paul Mitchell makes. It's my favorite to use whenever I'm doing any hand painting. Okay, so you're gonna notice now, you've got a little space here where you have your lightener and where you've stopped that base. So you can leave it if you like whatever that base is there, you can leave it if that's gonna give you a nice diffusion, or you can go in there and you can just feather that color down. So the whole goal, we don't want to necessarily combine our color and our lightener, but to say that they're never gonna touch in an application like this is just not gonna happen. So you'll notice on the hair, you'll see the hair will start to turn a little pinky or purple. And all that's happening is there's a chemical reaction happening between the lightener and the color. Now, if you're gonna think about which one is stronger, lightener is always gonna eat through the color. So if you, let's say, get a lightener on an area you don't want and you decide to put color over the top of it to fix it, the lightener is going to eat through it. You've got to get the lightener off of it. So again, we're not trying to mix our lightener and our color together, but if they touch, you're gonna see that little pinky purpley color. All right, so once I have that in there, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna lay a foil right on top. Now here's the important thing to think of. Once you've laid your foil down, it's down. It's really hard in these kinds of techniques to just peek or take it off, look, and then put that same foil back on, because all this foil or all this lightener and color has been transferred in different areas. You don't know that you're putting that foil right on exactly where it was before. So typically, if I have to check a section, I'm gonna check that section, okay, looking good. And now I'm gonna take a clean, fresh foil and top it with that, okay? All right, so moving into the next section, we're gonna stay with our diagonals, and notice my section size here. I don't know if you can see it as well. I'm going about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch. A lot of this is gonna be dependent upon the formation and texture of the hair as well as the density. So really just being aware of how much hair they have, and if I take a bigger section size, is it gonna leave a holiday? Okay, so first thing again, I have my base. I'm gonna go ahead and tap my regrowth area. And then I'm gonna bring down my base. Now notice on this one, I kept it up a little bit higher. I didn't take my base down as much. And that's just gonna give me more of the lightness and less of that dimension right there. Okay, so then taking a little bit of product, and this is key right here, guys, a little bit of product. If you load this brush up with too much product, you're gonna have product flopping and flying everywhere. Another thing I really want you to notice is how the brush looks with product. The whole point is to keep your product at the tips of these brush. If you start to see product all over the brush, now you have a higher chance of those areas transferring to another area on the head and leaving some spot or holiday. So what I like to do is I like to have, where are they? Oh, I'm literally using all of them. I always keep extra tint brushes on my tray so that if one's getting too dirty, I can swap it right out. The other thing I can do is always have a towel on my SMA, and that way if it's getting on the sides, I can just wipe my sides. So I know, not a very fun thing, but it actually will help you so much. Okay, so I have my lightener. I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna paint my lightener onto the areas that I did not apply my base. Doing my push through down here at the bottom, meaning I want that product to go all the way through. And then bringing it up.
A question. Do you recommend often to put on the base color first before you use your lightening products?
No, you don't have to necessarily. I'm trying to think why I do that. I don't know. I don't know why I do that, actually. I think my main importance, I guess, when I'm doing something like this, the majority of my guests have gray hair, and they want their gray hair touched up more than they want anything else. So I'm thinking that's maybe why I do that. I touch up that gray first and then move in. Yeah, I don't think there's a right or wrong. I think you could do either one. Okay, so this is something important that I want to show you guys. And this was like mind-blowing for me when I learned this. So there are a lot of times that this application, so our edging application, almost looks like you have a shelf in the middle of the hair. And you're like, how did I get that shelf? I did the edges and then I did the middle. How did the shelf happen? You want to make sure that whatever point you are stopping your lightener up here, so even if it's lower, your point is there, you want to be able to draw a diagonal line to where your point is going to be. You can't see that very well. To where your point is going to be where your dip is. If you, let's say, have a line that ends maybe further over on your section and you don't have that diagonal line connecting up on the other side, you're going to create that shelf. I hope that was easy enough to understand. But really, so you really just want to make sure that you're looking at these as diagonal lines, and you want to connect these diagonal lines. And really that can make or break a service as well. All right, so after I've done 2 here, and really the reason that I wanted to do 2 around this hairline is because I wanted that lightness up around the face. But I don't want lightener, or I don't want blonde everywhere. I want to see dimension. So my next section, I'm actually going to move into set myself up for some horizontal, is going to be just my base. So we're going to put our gloves on. And this is one thing Colin Caruso actually told me, and I think it was the best advice ever. He said, sometimes the hair that you don't touch, or the hair that you keep the darkest, is the most important. I think whenever we're hand painting, we think that we have to lighten everything, and that's the important part. But really, sometimes it's the hair we don't touch. If I put lightener on every single area, I'm not going to have the dimension that maybe I want. So just something to think about when you are doing your hand painting. Some of us want to go like lightener crazy. So just make sure to think about where that dimension is going to be as well. So in here, because it was a wider section, I just want to make sure that I'm getting that root area. Now, this is something I think is super important to bring up. We have 2 ways we can go about this. You'll notice that I went in there and I touched up that base first on all of those sections. Now, because I touched up the base, we know the majority of the hair is going to be here at the base, and our ends get a little bit skinnier. So I might not need as small sections as I did up here to get the same saturation. I like to use the least amount, or clip the hair up the least amount I can, because each time I clip up, I am essentially taking more time. So once I have my whole base is saturated, great, looks good. Now I can go ahead, and because I have color on here too, it actually helps. I can just drape that over and pull this color through. And again, my section is a little bit wider because my ends are a little skinnier. So it's okay to make that section wider. I know that I'm going to get the saturation. All right. Drop that down, and you are going to want to top this with a foil as well, because you're going to go in and you're going to do some more hand painting. You always want to make sure you've covered that up. So getting my clean foil is super fun with gloves on. And I'm going to go ahead and top that there. Okay, then I would switch into my horizontal sections. Okay, so I'm going to have more diffusion here on the sides where I went diagonally. Once I've switched to my horizontal placement, it's going to be a little bolder. So what that means is my edge is even more important now. I need to make sure I don't have any shelf or any area where that doesn't blend, because I'm using a placement that is bold, if that makes sense. All right, so tapping my regrowth. And I do like to make sure that I have tapped it on both sides. Just, again, maybe because I'm crazy and I want to make sure everybody's gray's covered, but both sides is going to be key. I'm going to go and add in my dark. And I kept it a little bit wider. Yep.
There's a question that's come in the, actually in the chat box a couple times versus the Q&A, and it was asking about, one, are you concerned with color and lightener coming together? You know, should that be a concern if the two mix? And then the other one is, what signs do you look for in texture, density, porosity that tell you when you want to wrap the foil versus let it process, you know, with nothing on it?
Whether you want to use the foil or wrap the foil?
Julie, so are there signs that you look for, whether it's texture, density, porosity, that tell you when you want to wrap it in foil to process versus nothing? So I think you were talking about, you know, letting it process with air and, you know.
Yeah, open air processing really on anybody is going to give you a smaller amount of lift. Whenever you use foils, it's going to incubate and it's going to get hot and it's going to make that product lift a little bit better. So anytime I'm looking at a guest and they want to be really bright blonde and I have them dark right at the moment, I know that I need to go in there and I need to put it in foils. Another thing I look at, like you said, with the texture, if I've got somebody with really coarse hair, I know that there's way more cuticle layers that I've got to work through to be able to remove that color. So I'm going to need as much heat as I have. So layering my foil for that is going to be essential. To touch on the point about our lightener and our color touching, yes, it's going to touch at some point, but the idea is not to blend the two together. We don't want to blend our lightener right into our color. We want it to stop kind of where that lightener is. So if they touch, not the end of the world. Our lightener is going to eat through that color, but we don't want to mix them. That's not the goal here. And if they do touch, you're going to notice they just kind of turn a little pinky purple, and that's just a chemical reaction that's happening between the lightener and the color. All right. Okay, so there's my horizontal application. All right, any questions as far as this side goes, Erica, that I can clear up before we move on?
There was a question about how many foils are placed between each base color. If that makes sense.
So I sandwich all of the foils whenever I'm doing a hand painting. So what that means is I'm going to use, this is the foil I just topped the other foil with. I'm going to use this foil. I'm not going to put a new foil in there to paint on it for that next section. So, because really if you're putting a new foil in underneath, you're using a lot of foils. And the guest's head is going to be super heavy at the end. So yeah, I do like to sandwich. Now, when I'm painting on this section below, I do want to keep in mind that there's, you know, hand painting happening in there too. So not to be too aggressive with how hard I'm pushing. But you can absolutely sandwich as you move up. Did that answer it? Hope so.
Yes, no other questions at this time. Oh, actually, well, somebody would like to know your pricing for hand painting, but I think you could speak on that for a little while, you know, with bowls and how long it typically takes. You do it by the hour product.
Yeah, my starting prices, just starting color price to walk in the door is $160. And then from there, it builds based on what we're doing. How much hair they have, are we putting highlights in, are we doing hand painting, am I customizing? How much hair do you, like how long is it taking me because you've got a ton of hair? So yeah, it's all gonna vary, but to walk in the door to start a color, whether it be a basic color or dimensional, you're starting at 160 and then it's gonna go up from there. Now, I'm not saying everybody has to price that way, that's just has been my pricing. Okay, so once we've gone through these two front sides, I would make sure that these two sides are completed first before I move anywhere else, because I want that lift to be very similar. And then this top, remember we have that veil up here, and the veil is gonna be just basic color. It's gonna be our base. So you could, after you get these two sides done, you can go and apply up to the veil. It's up to you, or you can move to the back, apply to your back, and then go to your veil. Really, it's gonna be up to you. All right, so let's look at the back here. Let me raise her a little bit so you guys can see. Okay, I'm just gonna leave her right there. She doesn't wanna raise. All right, so we're gonna go in with our diagonal placements here, again, giving us some diffusion. Now, one thing I do like to keep in mind and to be aware of as I'm going through my section is people love to see, I know we think like the nape, doesn't matter. No, people love when they're having a hand painting or dimensional color to see that light blonde that's coming right here. So this is a very important part of the hair that I think sometimes gets overlooked. So when I'm going through, typically in that nape, and I'm going in with a diagonal section, I kind of like to follow my hairline. So it's a pretty steep vertical diagonal. That's also going to give me more of that strand and band through here. It's going to make it look a little piecier. Now, if you don't want it to look piecey and you want it to be way more blended, totally fine. You can make sure that you're taking that a little less steep. Just know you're not going to get this area behind the ear. So, which is fine. You don't have to. But if it's a big deal for the guest when she pulls her hair back, to see that all of it's blonde, you might want to baby light it just around the hairline, or you might want to just make sure you are edging the same here as you are here. All right. So we'll go there with our diagonal. Clipping this hair all the way out of the way. If that's anywhere close to what I'm trying to do, it just gets in the way. All right, taking my color, and I'm gonna go in, apply to the back, around on the side, get the front or the top of that section, and then again, making sure, because this is a little bit wider of a section, making sure I have that coverage and saturation in between the foil here. I'm sorry, in between the section. All right, so now I've got my dark that I need to add in. Let me show you, actually we'll do it the other way this time. I'll show you with, let's put our light in and then go ahead and add in our dimension. Okay, so looking at my section, where do I want to see my peaks? Where do I want to see my valleys? Another thing I do, which sounds so ridiculous when I say it, but I kind of like start moving my arm first before I even touch the hair. Because you'll notice with any hand painting balayage, if you take the tint brush and go straight to a section, you're delivering a lot of product and you're going to be almost making like a blob of color there. So the less force you have as you're making contact with the hair, the more diffused you can make it. So my way is like just kind of rowing my boat, getting my arm going. And then as I start to touch, it's going to be a lighter touch. Okay. And then notice too, you'll see sometimes I will go up against the hair, but what you can't really see is I'm going so lightly when I go up. If you are using too much pressure, this hair A is gonna push up and go all over the place. It's also not good for the hair. Remember, at this point, we're going with the cuticle. We don't wanna go against the cuticle, especially with lightener. All right, so adding in. And remember we talked before, my points here, I wanna make sure I have a diagonal line to where it ends, and same over here, and have that connect. So that really will dictate how high up you have to go with your peak or valley. If you maybe didn't give yourself enough room to have a diagonal, you might have to take it up a little bit higher. All right, so then taking your foil, placing it under, and now I can go in and add my base. I do feel like I have more control, actually, when I do the base first, to answer that question. Now notice this is something just to, oh, you can't see, just to bring up, my ends I didn't push through on. So what's gonna happen is this color here is gonna have that diffused, lightened end. If I want that to be bright and completely blonde, then I'm gonna wanna push through. And then also remember, because we're putting a base in, we don't have a base on here. So whatever this color is, you better be happy with it. If you're not, just make sure you are covering it with something. Okay, and then you're just gonna keep moving up the head in that manner. Again, at the hairline, I like to start with with this technique, my 2 back-to-back foils of lightener. or my 2 back-to-back sections of lightener, I should say. And then I'll drop one out as my base. Any questions, Erica?
Hey, Kristy, it's Stephanie. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, Erica had to jump off. So we do have a couple questions from Jason Ballant. He is asking, do you have to use a brush or can you actually go in with your hands?
I can honestly say I've never used my hands. Now I can't speak on it because I've never used my hands, but we do want to look the most professional as we can if we're trying to charge a lot for our service. And my thought is if I have it on my hands, I have a higher probability of going in there and touching it. Now, maybe I misunderstood. I will use, especially if I'm doing open air processing, I will use the back of my hand to load my product so that if I need to redip, I'll just redip off of the back of my hand. I don't know if that answered it or if the other one did. I also don't know if you could get a great blend if you're using your fingers to go in and get a blend. That's just my thought.
Okay, and then we have 2 more questions. One from, well, they're from Julie Wardley. You mentioned that you don't want to go against the cuticle with lightener. Is it better to feather down from the root? And what is the advantage of feathering upward versus downward?
Yeah, so I'm not going to say you can never feather up and go against the cuticle. Like I said, I was doing it a little bit, just making sure I have a little light hand there. Kind of rule of thumb in my head is don't go up against the cuticle because it can be more damaging and aggressive to the hair. I do it because sometimes you just need that motion to get the blend you're looking for. And you'll notice, like if you're blending something, where you are putting the brush first is where you're going to have the most impact of product. Where you are lifting the brush off is where you're going to see the blend or the feather. So if I'm going up against it, I'm pulling off as you get up to the base versus I'm having to blend with my brush hitting that point as my first point. Make sense? All right, so I typically would work side by side when I get into the back, and really that's because I want to make sure I'm consistent. How high am I going on each one? And then so I would work all the way up to this point here, remembering to add in the base in some sections by itself so that I have the dimension, and then I would go ahead and work in more horizontally. If you guys want to tackle the application or the technique, don't get scared by the diagram. The diagram is just showing every single area. So don't be scared by that. But that is our hand painting with a base, with our color. If there are more questions I can answer right now, then great, I'm totally up for it. Have any one-on-one questions you want to ask, you can go ahead and message me through Instagram. That's an option too. Do we have any other ones, Stephanie?
Yeah, it looks like we have one last one from Alexis Royalty. Do you prefer to use a bowl for lightener or the paddle for lightener?
If I'm doing open air lightener and I don't have a foil like this, I will either use the back of my hand or the paddle. It kind of just depends, I guess, on what I'm doing. I typically like to use the back of my hand more than I do the paddle. The paddle, I feel like it's just one more thing you're having to hold. Now, with that being said, I've got colleagues and some people on my advanced team that absolutely love the paddle and wouldn't hand paint without it. So I don't want you to think just because I don't like it, it's not a commonly used tool. It absolutely is. I think work better with the back of my hand.
Okay, and then I think we have one more. Is it true that lightener stops processing after a certain amount of time? I have heard 2 different answers.
So the main thing that's going to stop lightener from processing is when lightener dries out. The second it doesn't have any moisture, it doesn't have that capability to continue to lighten. So like, you know, we've had those moments where doing trainings and stuff, we'll leave it on a little, leave the lightener on a little bit longer than we would normally leave it on for a guest. And as long as there's moisture still in there, it is going to keep lifting. Now, if you have a little amount of product and maybe you don't have a foil on the top, or maybe it's, you know, not in a foil, once it dries out, it will stop. So I would kind of think of it in the sense that it will continue as long as it has that moisture. It's not going to give you the same kind of lift. It's not going to, you know, give you the power that it would when you first apply it, but it can still do some lifting and cause some damage.
Okay, and I think that's it. Thank you so much for your time, Kristy.
Thank you guys. Excited to see you next week.
All right, and the recording will be on plugged in for everybody. Thank you guys.